Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the absolute essential knowledge from your sources. Today, we're doing something quite fascinating. We're diving into organizational survival under extreme pressure. Yeah, our sources lay out this really incredible story of resilience. It's about the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, an organization outlawed, persecuted not once but twice in India's early decades, first in 1948, then again during the emergency, 75 to 77. So our mission for you listening is to get our heads around how this huge cadre-based movement actually managed to survive. Survive two very different uses of intense state power. We're talking mass arrests, financial ruin for families, and in that second instance, really systemic state brutality. What was it about their internal setup, their structure, that allowed the discipline of the Swayamsevaks of the volunteers to hold? And, how did these trials shape where they went next?
That's precisely the core question, isn't it?
No.
The difference between the two bands is, I think, key. The 48 band, that was fast, a reaction, really, driven by shock, national anger after Gandhi's death. And it forced the RSS towards, well, seeking constitutional legitimacy, building a political shield, essentially.
Okay.
But the 75 band during the emergency, that was different, calculated,
No.
sustained authoritarianism. It tested the organization's actual structure, its tenacity, and the physical endurance of its members. The common thread, though, absolutely, the loyalty, the commitment of the individual Swayamsevaks.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack that first one then. That really tense moment, 1948, right after independence, the trigger event. It was just catastrophic for the whole country.
Exactly. The trigger, as the sources clearly state, was Mahatma Gandhi's assassination.
Yeah.
January 30, 1948. The assassin, Nathuram Godse. It's important context. The source describes Godse as a former RSS member, someone who had apparently dissociated before the act itself.
But the political fallout was immediate. The government didn't wait. February 4th, 1948, the RSS is declared an unlawful association. The official reason given was to root out the forces of hate and violence. So, boom. Suddenly, they're under this massive cloud of national suspicion.
And the crackdown was incredibly swift. Targeted P.P. Golwalkar Guruji, the Sarsantalek. He's the head of the organization, arrested February 1st. The records show 20,000 Swayamsevaks arrested by the 4th. The government seemed determined to just crush them before they could even react.
20,000. Just like that. And that was only the start. Over the next few months, the estimates go up to, 80,000 volunteers ending up in jail?
That's the figure cited, yes. Around 80,000. And you have to remember, jail conditions back then, it wasn't easy.
Right.
These were often young men, many the main earners for their families. Detained without trial, preventive detention laws often thrown in with, common criminals. Conditions were poor, demoralizing. But interestingly, the organization immediately focused inwards, on discipline. The prisoners tried to keep their routines, like saying their collective Vedic prayers at mealtime. A small thing, maybe, but symbolic. Unity against the chaos.
And outside the prisons, the cost must have been immense, socially, financially.
Absolutely devastating. Breadwinners jailed. Families facing instant poverty, plus this huge social stigma. The sources mentioned they had to rely on these hidden networks. RSS well-wishers, sympathetic shopkeepers, just to get by. Nobody dared help openly, not when the group was accused of, being linked to Gandhi's assassination.
So being criminalized overnight like that, it must have forced some serious thinking inside the organization.
Deep self-assessment, exactly. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. They needed to prove they were patriotic, loyal to the new Indian Constitution.
And this is where the strategy starts to shift, right? December 1948, they launched the Satyagraha, civil disobedience. Peaceful, disciplined. But hang on, sending 60,000 volunteers out to deliberately get arrested, that sounds incredibly risky. Was it just a moral point, or were they trying to clog the system?
It was, I think, a calculated risk serving both purposes. Definitely a moral statement. They were actively waving the national flag, the very flag they'd been accused of disrespecting, shouting slogans for civil liberties.
Okay, proving their loyalty.
Yes. But tactically, it was brilliant. Designed to just overwhelm the jails, the administration. It put enormous pressure back on the government, this disciplined, nonviolent mass action. And crucially, that whole experience, being in jail, operating underground, it forced a major strategic change. The sources talk about clandestine discussions among the leadership. They realized cultural work alone wasn't enough protection. The Sangh needed, a political wing. A kind of insurance policy against government bias, against state suppression in the future.
Okay, so that's the big shift, the birth of the political arm.
That's the foundational moment. Golwalkar Guruji encouraged Swayamsevaks to join this new party, the Bharatiya Jana Sangh, creating a political firewall, you could say. a formal constitutional front, so their other activities could continue without being declared illegal overnight.
Makes sense. A shield.
Precisely. And it worked. The mass arrests, the discipline satyagraha, it forced negotiations. The ban was lifted July 1949. But, and this is important, only after the RSS drafted its first written constitution, explicitly pledging loyalty to the Indian Constitution and the national flag. So the 1948 trial really defined their mission and pushed them directly into formal politics for the first time.
Okay, so 48 forces them into constitutional legitimacy, gives them this political shield, the Janasangh. Fast forward 2 decades. Did that shield hold up when the emergency hit? Because that seemed like a whole different level of state power.
It really didn't. Not against that kind of force. The scale of the 1975 crackdown.
Yeah.
It makes 48 look almost, well, restrained in comparison. This was systemic repression. July 4th, 1975.
Yeah.
A week after Indira Gandhi imposed the emergency, RSS banned again. But this time, the state didn't just see them as, like, a problematic group. They saw the RSS as the core, the nucleus of resistance to the new regime.
And the numbers arrested during the emergency just underline that focus, don't they? They're sobering. Over 100,000 RSS volunteers eventually detained. One source estimates more than 25,000 out of 30,000 people held under MISA. That's the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, were signed volunteers.
That's a staggering proportion. And MISA was the key tool here. It basically let the government jail anyone indefinitely. No charge, no trial. That's what made the 75 crackdown so fundamentally different. And Indira Gandhi publicly justified it by directly linking the RSS, again, to the forces behind Gandhi's murder, decades later, clearly positioning them as an entity of the state to legitimize what was happening.
And the state's actions, the treatment of detainees, it reflected that enemy status. The sources detail just horrific things, extreme torture.
Yes, Swayamsevaks were often singled out. In prisons, interrogation centers, across the country. The accounts are brutal.
It sounds systematic.
It does. Calculated brutality. Trying to break their spirit, their discipline. Methods included stripping, beatings, electric shocks, pulling out fingernails. Even this thing called the aeroplane treatment, hanging prisoners from the ceiling. This wasn't just random violence by rogue officers. It feels like state-sanctioned terror.
There's that specific example, the bullet batch in Kerala, Kasaragod, young activists who protested, and the police reaction was just unrestrained.
Utter impunity. The leader, Pramod Bhatt, skull fractured, handcuffed to his cot while in a coma. His friends taken to some secret camp, brutally beaten. It shows the darkness of that era, not just legal detention, but illegal sanctioned brutality.
And the human cost was immense.
Tragic. Over 100 volunteers are cited as dying as martyrs, due to torture or just being denied medical care. Senior figures, too, like Pandurang Shirsagar, who died in custody.
And outside, for the families. Constant surveillance, searches, financial ruin, selling jewelry, land, just to survive those 21 months.
Yeah.
But all this pressure, it seems, forced the kind of organizational response that ultimately, well, it kind of outsmarted the state's strategy, didn't it?
Absolutely, because with all the normal channels shut down, press censored, phones tapped, mail intercepted, that political wing, the Janasangh, was effectively neutralized. The RSS had to fall back entirely on its core strength, that robust, person-to-person, decentralized network.
That low-tech approach.
Exactly. And ironically, that became their biggest advantage.
So this is where we really see that organizational structure you mentioned earlier, these tens of thousands of cadres down to the village level in 4-man cells. Why were those tiny cells so effective?
It was almost perfectly designed for resisting surveillance. Highly dispersed, highly compartmentalized. If one cell got caught, the damage was limited. The wider network wasn't compromised.
Right, it couldn't cascade.
Precisely. A more centralized group would have just crumbled under MISA arrests and wiretaps. But this dispersed, high-trust network, they could keep communicating. Word of mouth, trusted messengers. Old school, but it worked.
And they became the communication lifeline for the whole anti-emergency movement, didn't they? Coordinating through the Lok Sangharsh Samiti, the LSS.
Yes, they played a key role there. Moving information, coordinating actions nationally, and the ingenuity they used. It's quite something.
The disguises.
Incredible. Posing as Sikh preachers, wandering sadhus, salesmen, anything to move without attracting attention. They even used foreign sanctuaries. Places like Nepal, which actually refused India's request to extradite activists. That provided a vital safe haven.
I'm finding the propaganda war, too. Literally from basements, printing secret newsletters.
Yeah, like the journal Satyavani. Printed on basic mimeograph machines, hidden away in farm sheds or cellars. Imagine the risk. If caught, the punishment would be brutal. But they did it, keeping people informed about the censorship, the protests, what was really happening.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how this, as you said, high-trust, low-tech system managed to completely bypass the government's modern surveillance machine. Tapped phones, informants, the works.
It really demonstrated incredible tenacity, and it proved a crucial point. Sometimes, against overwhelming state power, a dispersed, high-loyalty structure is far more resilient than a top-heavy, centralized one. It's just harder to break.
And that very visible sacrifice, that organizational grit, it earned them a huge amount of public legitimacy afterwards, didn't it? Which brings us to the legacy.
It certainly did. Domestically, the media was silenced, but international outlets, the New York Times, The Economist,
Yeah.
The Guardian, they started reporting on the excesses, and they questioned the government's narrative about the RSS being some kind of armed threat. They pointed out, hey, where are the weapon seizures? That foreign coverage was vital.
Undermining the official story.
Exactly. And back home, the disciplined, nonviolent struggle earned respect, even from unlikely quarters. There's that striking anecdote about the veteran communist leader, A.K. Gopalan, a lifelong opponent. But he apparently remarked that seeing the Swayamsvaks endure torture convinced him they must be driven by some lofty ideal. That kind of grudging respect from an ideological foe, that's a significant shift towards mainstream acceptance.
So politically, what was the impact? It sounds like this network became the engine room for the opposition.
It really did. The ground-level backbone of the anti-emergency opposition, directly contributing to that stunning landslide victory for the Janata Party in the 1977 election. Janata leaders themselves openly acknowledged it afterwards. They said the RSS cadre's groundwork was indispensable.
And the shared experience of jail that forged connections.
Absolutely. Many future leaders, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, L.K. Advani, they emerged from prison with enhanced national stature. They often spoke about the camaraderie built in jail across party lines, how that was crucial in actually forming the Janata coalition government that followed.
And the RSS itself, institutionally, how do they remember this period?
It's deeply ingrained. They observed June 25th, the start of the emergency, as a black day. Sanvihan Bachchaldi was Save the Constitution Day, to honor the suffering. And stories from the underground are retold constantly, including those about a young Narendra Modi who apparently acted as a courier using disguises. These stories become part of the organizational lore, used to inspire new generations.
Right. So bringing it all together then.
The final synthesis seems clear. These two bands, decades apart, forced the RSS to develop and prove two very different but successful blueprints for survival. 1948 was about achieving legitimacy, adapting by embracing politics, building that shield. 1975 to 77, when that shield failed against overwhelming force, it became about sheer organizational tenacity, physical endurance, relying on that deep, decentralized structure. And ultimately, their role during the emergency cemented their place, in the historical narrative at least, among the defenders of civil liberties during that really dark period for India.
So we see both a political strategy born from the first crisis and an architectural resilience proven by the second. Constitutional legitimacy first, then systemic endurance. Well, thank you for walking us through that. It's a complex history, but a really compelling story of organizational adaptation. And for you listening, the sources really highlight something interesting. Democratic values survived the emergency. Yes, partly through well-known leaders, but maybe just as much through the quiet sacrifice, the operational skill of countless ordinary people using pretty low-tech methods. Which leaves us with a thought. In our world today, dominated by digital surveillance, constant monitoring, could a low-tech, high-trust underground network like the one used in '75 actually be replicated successfully to resist a widespread crackdown? Or are physical movement and mimeograph machines truly things of the past? Something to think about. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.